Eric ran a little company you might have heard of called Google, from a very small company. I met him I met him way before that, but we're going to talk about Google and where everything's going in digital. And Eric is a really smart and says a lot and answers questions, which is great about him, which is why we love him. But before we start, I want to make a quick disclosure for me. I'm still trying to figure out what this is, what Nicholas, this kind of company we have. But I went to the journalism school, and I also I am married to a Google executive. But as Eric will tell you, that hasn't stopped me from being super mean to him and other people at Google. And I don't have any financial, unfortunately. I'm the only person who's not a gold digger in Silicon Valley. We have no financial relationship because I signed it away. And Walt has a disclosure.
Well, I have a disclosure of a slightly different kind. It's about the 92nd Street Y.
He was married
and
to it.
Columbia. It kind of ties them together. When I was at the journalism school, I couldn't afford to go to the journalism school like a lot of you who go to college and grad school. So I got a fellowship and I had some loans, but I also needed a part-time job. And in those days at least, and perhaps still today, the school made arrangements with various institutions around New York City that needed somebody that knew how to write or whatever. And I was actually placed in a part-time job, which I did throughout the year that I was getting my master's, at the 92nd Street Y, editing the paper newsletter that existed in those days, which I'm told no longer exists. But and I don't think I've been back here since. So it's quite an interesting.
Anyway, but enough about us. What do you think of us? No, let's talk with Eric. So we're going to start off talking. We interviewed Eric at D 2 years ago, I think, and he started off a meme that was really important, I think, and really led the conference in the next year about platforms. And Walt.
So yeah, Eric talked about something he called the Gang of Four, which was a way of describing four companies that command platforms. I'll let him, he can say it better, that kind of are, at that time, this was 2 years ago, really made them in some ways the most influential or powerful companies in tech. Can you talk a little more about that, who the companies are, and what has changed, if anything, in the last 2 years?
They've all gone up in stock price. And the observation that you and I made when we were chatting about this was that something unusual has happened. There are four companies that are network platforms of one kind or another that are generating enormous scale global effects. We've not had that before in our industry. It was originally IBM and then Microsoft and so forth. But now we have at least four, right? And the four that we identified were Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and Google, each with different strategies, each competing and partnering with each other, but with massive investments. And those investments ultimately lead to this amazing, amazing sense of value that everyone here in the room gets.
Now, two things at the time, you left out Microsoft.
That was deliberate.
Which we noticed. We noticed that.
That was deliberate.
And the second point now, today, 2 years later, with the troubles that Facebook's had in their IPO and some of the questions around their business, is it 3.5, a gang of 3.5?
I think it's still 4, and here's why. Facebook announced 1 billion users, and those are committed users. Those are real people who spend a lot of time on Facebook. You can make money with that.
So,
I mean, if I gave you 1 billion users as committed in hours and time on a site like Facebook, you can make money there.
Oh, if we got 1 billion users at All Things D,
yeah, just think about it.
We'd make some money.
It's not that complicated.
So talk about what that means now, because it's starting. We were talking with Tim Armstrong this afternoon around lunchtime, and one of the things that he was talking about is that there's going to be this great war between these platforms, and he's, as a smaller company in that
over
world,
identity.
Over identity, and over that you have to be part of the cloud of Google, the cloud of Apple.
We should explain that Tim Armstrong runs AOL.
Right. So talk about, is it a coming war between you? Because there's been the lawsuit between Apple and Samsung, which is a de facto attack at Google. How do you look at these platforms now? They exist, so what happens?
Well, these companies are incredibly competitive with each other, these four. And so you can use a war metaphor or whatever you want, But the fact of the matter is they're run by smart people, they're very aggressive, there's a lot going on, there's, again, tremendous investment, which I would argue benefits all of us as consumers a great deal. With respect to identity, one of the mistakes that we made in the internet is we never gave a system that gave you a reliable definition of who you were, right? So today it's very easy to be somebody you are not on the internet. You can have as many identities as you want. They're highly revocable, they're difficult to rank, et cetera. Facebook emerged because they had the best way of sorting out identity, which is who your friends are and disambiguating it between people. But all of the companies will have some form of an identity solution. Google has recently launched something called Google+, which has an analogous way of doing it.
But he was talking about size.
But what Tim was talking about, and I think others talk about, is you know, you have these kind of stacks that go up into the cloud, content services, storage, obviously email, messaging, so forth. When you set up, you know, an Android phone, if you have a Google account, and
it's just easier.
You have said that you will are willing to have backed up your previous device. It'll just restore not everything, but a lot of the settings. Same thing. Apple now does the same thing with iCloud. So there's a certain stickiness of being in one of those clouds, and I think he was saying, well, he's not running one of these four giants, so where does that leave other people?
Facebook started this with something called Facebook Connect,
right,
which is a way of logging into everybody else's sites, and they did a good job. Apple, of course, has logged in users. They were late with respect to iCloud, but it's the same principle. And Google's objective is simply to get more registered users. And you may continue to use Google anonymously without telling us who you are and so forth for, you know, for infinity, right? We're not going to change that. But our services will be better if we know who you are and if you give us permission to remember your search history, give you better targeted answers.
But does that make you have to be a citizen of Google? Because right now, that's how I feel like. I'm either a citizen of Google, which I am not. I'm a citizen of Apple, apparently. But I do use Google services, and they are easier to use when I become...
Google is better if you're logged into Google, right?
So is that forcing consumers into that kind of choice?
We're certainly not forcing it, but it is a choice that you get. It will be better. And all of these systems, I think, will allow some level of interoperability because the consumers demand it. With our platform, you can use the email system that's on Android to connect to non-Gmail email systems, for example. And those things are not going to change.
Well, it's a separate app. It's the only phone I've ever seen with two email apps. You reserve one for Gmail. I don't know why, but you do, because I can get Gmail on Windows or Macs or iPhones or Windows phones.
The technical reason is that one uses a different protocol than the other.
Well, how come I can get Gmail on these other clients?
Because you're using IMAP as opposed to the Gmail internal protocol.
Okay.
And the Gmail internal protocol is faster, more secure, et cetera.
So you have your sort of cloud system and you know, identity system. You mentioned Apple has one. Microsoft actually, even a little later than Apple is.
Microsoft actually announced the first one, but it didn't really work very well.
Yeah. So they have one, certainly with Windows 8. Some of you may know there's a really big overhaul of Windows coming out in a few weeks, and one of the features of it, among many others, is a kind of identity, one sign-in thing. And Facebook obviously is all based on identity.
Can I suggest?
But you do things on everyone's platform, right?
We do, but can I suggest that the focus should not be on whether people lock in identity platforms, but rather how do the platforms evolve in terms of features and functionality. There's a huge race now specifically between Apple and the Android platform for additional features of one kind or another. And we would argue that if you're using the Chrome platform, you have the world's most powerful front-end browser. And in many countries, Chrome is now the #1 browser, beating Internet Explorer, as well as Firefox and Safari. And technically, that allows us to have very sophisticated applications that run on your client device that talk to cloud servers. For those of you that are having trouble following the cloud argument, the cloud is roughly a large set of servers somewhere else that you don't know where they are. And all the interesting information and computation is done in the cloud on these servers, and your device is simply a sort of front end for that. So you can think of your phone as a front end for a supercomputer. Give you a classic example, when you do voice recognition, What all the phone does is take it from voice, put it in text, ship it to the cloud. Then the cloud does all of the necessary work. It does translation and so forth, and it ships it back. All of the sort of sophisticated algorithms are done by the big computers somewhere
So
else.
everybody, it's not an actual cloud, okay? Write that down.
And it's called
all you
cloud.
non-geeks.
It's called clouds because 20 years ago, the drawing program that we had would only draw circles, and so you'd put the servers in circles, and you'd put them all together, and it looked like a cloud.
To you. Okay. But
That's the
let's
truth.
talk about the concept of that, but it's this idea of stacking, because I think, well, there's an expression, when elephants fight, the grass gets trampled. And just recently,
I think that's to some degree true. In
recently,
this case.
the maps. Let's talk. You've said a lot about the maps, and you have a lot of opinions about the map situation.
Apple should have kept with our maps.
Yeah, but
Okay, but
they didn't want
the
to.
counter argument was you did not maintain feature parity between the instantiation of your maps on their platform and the instantiation on Android.
That was one of their.
And the big difference, as you're well aware, was automated voice-prompted turn-by-turn navigation.
So we negotiated all of these details with Apple, and the fact of the matter is they had decided a long time ago to do their own maps, and you saw they did it. We knew this was coming because they did a series of acquisitions. I think what Apple has learned is that maps are really hard, and I think they really are hard, and we invested hundreds of millions of dollars in satellite work, airplane work, drive-by work to get the maps accurate, and we think we have the best product in the industry.
Why would they keep your maps? I don't. It's sort of like letting you in a door that's very.
Well, we had done that. We had it for almost 5 years.
But as you grow into
Apple has done extremely well during the last 5 years.
Right. We've noticed that, but so have you.
So,
but
actually, Apple's done very well using our maps.
But what would be an argument for keeping your maps other than they're better maps in terms of
how about
collecting
they're better
data?
maps?
Okay. But if
I mean, these are end-user products.
well, if the New York Times writes a better story, I don't really want it on All Things D. It's just at some point.
But the story is not something which tells people how to get around and not get lost. I mean, I'm sure that Apple has clearly made the decision to do their own maps. They made the decision a long time ago. And so I think we should assume that they will continue to make their maps better and address the criticisms that exist.
And where do you play on that platform then, in that world where they've kicked you off the maps? And it's assuming they're going to kick you off of search.
Are you going to do your own app that will be a
I don't want
optional
to pre-announce products. What I can tell you is that were we to do that, they would also have to approve it. Because remember, their app store.
Yeah, I
has to
understand they would have to approve it, but they've approved many map apps.
Well, they haven't approved all of Google's offerings over the years. So again, these are all subject to a discussion. One way to think about Apple and Google is these are two large, important sort of institutions, and they're always in communication with each other. So there's always negotiations going on between would you do this, would you do that, and so forth. And I think that's a structurally stable outcome. In a world where there are the gang of four, as we discussed earlier, each of the four should have significant conversations going on with each of the other of the four.
So
Why is it four? I mean, 2 years ago you left out Microsoft. Maybe because you don't like them. I don't know. I mean, aren't they a really important platform company with a whole cloud system and all the characteristics?
I think we'll see. Let's see what this new set of products does. As you have reviewed Windows 8 and you understand its quality and so forth and so on. Everyone I know has moved to the Mac in that space, so we'll see how that plays out. They're now behind. They're a well-funded, smart, well-run company that have not been able to bring out state-of-the-art products in the spaces that we're talking about as of yet.
So getting back to the relationships, you said all people are on talk. How would you look at the stated relationships with each of the other major players? Because I think you may not agree with me, but there's a level of enmity between Google and the others that is much higher than between, say, Amazon and a Facebook. It's clear. There's a clear.
Well, I would argue first and foremost, I believe that the Android-Apple platform fight is the defining fight in the industry today, and I didn't say that 2 years ago. And here's the argument. Apple has put God knows how many thousands of people and engineers to making this very good platform even better. The number of apps they have, so forth and so on, all the content. Everybody here knows if you're an iPhone user, think of all the partnerships they have. What's the scale of that? It's an enormously large platform for developers, knowledge, cloud services, and so forth. the Google platform, Android, is even larger. The surveys that we've seen of unit volume indicate that there are 4 times as many Android phones as there are iPhones. We just announced 1.3 million activations of Android phones per day globally, per day, with more than 500 million phones already in use, right? So if you do the math,
Lots.
we're talking about a billion. Just do a little math with me. If you're at 1.3 times 365, you have and of course that number is growing and growing and doubling every 6 months or something like this. This is well more than 1 billion devices globally within perhaps a year, perhaps
Are you
less
counting
than that.
tablets on Apple's side?
Yes. And again, Apple did a tremendous job with the iPhone and the tablets. Right? We now have lower cost, what I believe ultimately will be much higher volume tablets from our various partners, including Asus and Samsung and so forth. And there's many, many coming.
All right, so go back to Kara's question.
No, but what I want to say is that I think that because of that, we have not in our industry seen, you use the expression elephants, right? We've not seen platform network fights, competitive fights at this scale. And I go back to who's the beneficiary. The beneficiary is you all, right, globally. Right? Prices are dropping dramatically. Eventually people will be highly motivated to get you to use their platforms because they want to make money on the services. This is a wonderful value proposition.
So this is a bigger fight than the Windows Mac fight of the 80s, just because the scale is so much bigger?
Well, there's a couple things about the PC industry. I did not realize how much bigger the human population is than the PC industry. When you grow up in the PC industry, you always assume that's sort of the defining event horizon. But in fact, there are 6 billion phone users in the world today. There's somewhere more than 1 billion smartphone users, and that number will quickly get to 4 or 5 billion in the next sort of 3 to 4 years. So that's a much larger market than the PC industry as a whole. The price points are lower, the growth rates are faster.
How big is the PC industry, by contrast?
You're probably the expert. It's probably 1 billion, 1.5 billion installed units. It's on the order of those numbers. But the growth rates and unit volumes were passed a long time ago. I'm not saying bad things about PC industry. I'm just saying for many reasons, these new devices are replacements. One of the other trends that's happening that people should be aware of is that every month, every quarter, every year, the growth rate of mobile adoption exceeds everyone's expectations. And I think that's likely to continue. And the reason is that these devices are becoming so useful that unless you're a sort of a significant knowledge worker, which by the way the 3 of us are, you can probably live most of your life just with your mobile device. Just carry your tablet, carry your phone around. It's good enough for normal people who aren't typing all the time. And they're far, far more convenient because everything just works. And one of the great innovations in this industry is you turn them on and the connection has to work. You don't have to fiddle with the data cards. You don't have to plug anything in except to charge it. And all of a sudden, it just works. And I would say that 20 years ago, 10 years ago, people like myself, we missed that, right? That we didn't understand that if you could just make the whole thing work seamlessly, people would love you. I think we finally got to that point.
So again,
I'm not answering your enmity question, I'm sorry. So I think that defines that relationship, and that will continue. The other relationships are related in the following way. Facebook is attempting to become the world's communications hub. Right, it's one way to think about what they're doing. And they have a good start with 1 billion people. Amazon, of course, is attempting to be the world's largest store, and again, they're the leading player there. The two interrelate in the sense that, for example, Amazon is one of Google's largest customers, but you could argue they also, with respect to advertising, but you could also argue that they compete somewhat in product search and things like that. Facebook is, I think, largely now a Google competitor, but has partnerships with Apple and with Microsoft.
But you also, it's interesting, Google is, though, in everyone's business and among those 4. I mean, Google is now in Google Play, very kind of an attack at Amazon. You're doing your Google Plus, whatever it is. I still haven't quite figured it out. Maybe you could explain it for us. It's in Facebook's business. You're also, you buy Motorola, you're in Apple's business.
You're in Apple, well, even before you bought Motorola. I mean, you're essentially competing with Apple.
Again, the phrasing was such that we are late to the party. In most of those cases, we were early, but that's a separate discussion.
Whether you're late or early,
welcome to the competitive.
All of them, you said earlier, and you're right. All of them overlap, but Google seems to overlap the most with everybody.
I think
try to be in everything.
but let's cast it a different way. Google is trying to solve material, real problems in the world, and We're trying to do it with innovative solutions. You should judge us on the quality of our solutions.
But is there any like I have a feeling you're going to start a new tech news site at some point because you just feel like being in that
Well,
business.
we've actually looked at that.
Okay.
And we decided not to because you guys were doing such a good job.
Oh, please.
Oh.
In any
No,
case.
by the way, can I just answer that? Because I get in trouble if I joke and then it gets tweeted out.
Yeah.
That was a joke. We actually keep a barrier beyond which we don't go in editorial, right? It's hard to do content really well, and we've decided we're not going to cross that barrier.
Oh, can we get into that issue? One of the things you mentioned on your trip to Korea, we want to get back to the, you can dance if you like.
Oh, just the reference, for those of you who don't know, is that the current worldwide most famous person is a gentleman named Psy, PSY, and he issued a K-pop video called Gangnam Style, on July 15th. He has more than 400 million views in YouTube today. It is truly the expression of a new form of celebrity.
But you perform the dance, as I understand.
It's, I'll try to not do it here.
Okay.
I want to know how many views your version of it has.
Not nearly 400 million, thank goodness.
Okay.
But it's, if you have teenagers, they'll all show it to you.
So content, back to content. One of your executives, Marissa Mayer, longtime executive, moved on to Yahoo, which is known for content, and some content creation, a lot of content aggregation, but much Yahoo Finance, Yahoo others. And Google tried a little bit to get in that area, but it wasn't quite as aggressive. One of the things you talked about, one is how do you look at the content business if you're not going to be, because you bought some content companies, what, Zagat's, Photos, I guess, which one did they buy? Which one?
Those Travel.
Those two, Travel.
In Travel.
They're all data kind of things.
Yeah, database.
You thought about buying Yelp, you thought about buying others. How do you look at that business for her? And also, one of the things you mentioned is that you would love to do I want to clarify this, we were talking backstage. You said you'd love to do a search deal with them. That doesn't mean you can do a search. Do you think you can do a search
I don't know
deal?
if we can, but certainly
Do you think you can?
Certainly if Yahoo called up and wanted to do a search deal, we would take a look at it.
Do you think it's possible?
I don't know. We had a significant negotiation with Yahoo, which was kiboshed by the antitrust department in the waning years of the Bush administration, so we would have to consider that. But my going-in assumption is that Yahoo has a pretty binding contract with Microsoft. What happened was the previous CEO made a decision to take the search business and essentially purchase that from Microsoft, which essentially created the Bing and Google search rivalry.
After first going to Google, trying to
Yeah, and we tried hard to get a deal with Yahoo, but it was ultimately killed by the government.
Well, the government was going to have that, and do you imagine they're going to have it again?
I would never speculate about our government.
Well, since we're on the...
No, and because, and I think it's well known that the FTC is taking a look at Google, the European Commission is taking a look at Google, so we want to be careful about that stuff.
But I don't want you to be, I want you to be careless.
Tell us what they're looking at.
There's a story in the news today that the part of the FTC investigation, or their investigation is now spread to include the question of standards essential patents. I'm really sorry for the jargon stuff, which, tell me if this is wrong, I think are a type of patent that is considered so essential to making a product that the industry organizations agree that you should license them, everybody should license them at some reasonable price and not have court fights. A very simple way of explaining it. And the allegation, or that they're looking into, is that Motorola, which you now own, has been taking that kind of technology and not treating it as a standard essential patent. Is that right? I cannot actually talk about that for two reasons. One is I don't actually understand the details very well, and two, it just gets me too upset. We've taken the industry was run in a very different way, and these patent wars are death. And the reason is software is always overlapping. There are estimates that there are 200,000 patents that cover these devices. So we're now going through fight after fight to go find prior art. In every case, there's prior art that invalidates some patent that somebody claims they're having money for. So you get into a situation where there's a new trick, and the new trick is you get a judge to block the shipment of your product into a country. So for example, Apple managed to do this against Samsung in Germany. Now the effect of this, of course, is the Germans did not have a chance to evaluate the Samsung tablet at all, right?
And so now we're busy, you know, fighting through all of these sorts of issues. I think this is ultimately bad for innovation. I think it's ultimately bad for the way the software industry works. It eliminates choices. What happened in the software patent, which is what most of these people are arguing over, is that the quality of the patents issued, speaking as one who has one, was not that high, right? And because there wasn't a Google search engine, there wasn't sort of a patent search engine, it was very, very difficult. So we are now spending hundreds of millions of dollars again to go in and fight these fights. We're being attacked by patent trolls all the time and so forth, and we're winning. But it's very frustrating.
And you're buying patents too.
Of course, that's what companies have to do. And who is the
But
loser
aren't
here?
patents, I may be remembering this incorrectly, but I think patents are in the United States Constitution.
Patents are a legal monopoly for on the order of 21 years.
In the Constitution?
Yes.
Not in some law passed by some
I fully understand.
Congress at midnight when they were all drunk.
All I'm telling you is that the patent actually has to be valid, and there's lots and lots and lots of prior art. Many of these are people who work at Google, who invented this stuff in the 70s. So we haul them up and we say, you know, they come up with some paper that they wrote.
So how come the jury found for Apple in the case?
I don't know enough to comment on it, but I know that Samsung is upset about it.
Well, of course they're upset about it, but I mean, it wasn't, you know, a 2-to-1 ball game. I mean, it was a pretty broad win for Apple.
But that doesn't. Well,
and the jury found that none of Samsung's claims were valid. I mean, we don't. This is
again,
really not technology, but
it's better if I don't comment on the jury's decision. Our position has been that there is plenty of prior art, and whenever we've been.
So nothing is patentable?
I didn't say that. Plenty of things are patentable. You have to be first to file.
So getting into the impact, you're talking about it's death. You said patent wars.
It's really affecting the industry. And by the way, the victims are not Google and Apple, right, and Samsung and the others who are just annoyed about it. The victims are the little company that can't acquire the patents to protect themselves. Right. It is, in fact, a cost of innovation.
So, and yet, did it impact? What impact did it have on Google? You said it just annoys you that Apple lost this.
Well, again, I was trying to use a not too binding phrase.
Right. It won't kill you. It just irritates your foot. I don't know what.
Okay. There are many, many ways in which. Let's give you an example. Let's say that there is a patent claim, and for whatever reason there is not prior art, or it is prior art, but you can't convince. Well, you can usually work around them.
So let me shift gears a little bit. There's something historic that is about to happen in a few weeks, and it goes back to what we're talking about with Microsoft and the new Windows products, which is that Microsoft has built a factory and is producing and will introduce in a few weeks its first computer, classically defined computer. Obviously, they make Xbox, and Xbox is a specialized type of computer. But this is, you know, a tablet type computer that runs full Windows in some cases. In other cases, it's more akin to Android or iOS, which is, you know, or some of you know, is the Apple's operating system for smartphones and tablets. But it's a Microsoft-made computer in a company that always insisted it would never make a computer, and which built its entire business on the idea of licensing operating system to other people. You have such, I think, a tremendous perspective from your history in the industry. Isn't this a historic moment? And what does it mean? Why are they doing it? What does it mean?
It means a lot if the product works.
Okay, let's assume the product. Let's assume the product works.
He was talking conceptually. They've acknowledged
Let's
that
assume
Apple
it
was
works.
right.
Tell me why it means a lot. What does it mean?
Well, again, my answer stands. But
well, why is Microsoft doing this, in your opinion?
Well, Microsoft built a structural monopoly around Windows that worked very well for Microsoft, which gave its OEMs plenty of flexibility with respect to devices, platforms.
And OEMs are the hardware companies
and
like
so forth.
Dell or Acer.
And it worked
like
extremely well, produced enormous value, and a series of antitrust cases, which they lost.
We heard about that.
In 1997.
And you were part of that.
Absolutely. So so today, the question is that the right structural model to solve a customer's problem? And I'd say that we've moved to a new model, which is a much more integrated hardware-software experience. And again, I was on the board of Apple for about three and a half years, so I can say good things about Apple. Apple really did a phenomenal job in building these integrated solutions. I would argue the Android partners are now doing the same thing. And the Android model allows you to build almost any combination of hardware, and you don't even need our permission. It's all free. So we're going to see an explosion of new kinds of integrated hardware-software solutions that manage your car, they manage your music, they manage your life, they manage your refrigerator, and there are examples of all of this. I'm not just making that up.
But can some other hardware company really make a truly integrated device, based on Android that is comparable in integration, at least, to what Apple does and what Microsoft is now
in fact, Google is building something called Chromebooks, which have precisely that capability.
Yeah, but they're built by somebody else. They're labeled Samsung or
yes, but I don't know how Microsoft's making it. Does it Microsoft have its own factory?
It's a Microsoft-made device.
So what I'll tell you is the great thing about the structure of our industry is that now if you can design a piece of hardware, it's easy for you to get it built in the appropriate
And you
factory.
own a hardware company.
We do.
It's called Motorola.
That's right.
So when can we expect a pure Google phone made without, the model where you license Android to a
well, I would argue that's what Motorola is today. If Motorola is now a part of Google, I think that's your
So
question.
we should consider Motorola phones to be Google phones now.
Well, the way you asked the question, Motorola is a subsidiary of Google. There's no confusion over who owns Motorola.
Right.
We own it 100%.
That's right.
And they're busy improving their products from what we think is a pretty good base to be competitive with all the other Android platforms and against Apple.
Can you talk about that competition? Because Walt and I happened to be in Korea at Samsung at the time that was happening, and Koreans are not as a whole, but don't get angry or there was a little screamy from other people, but not from the Koreans. But they were sort of like, we are not happy. And we were like, whoa, they're really upset at Google. What is, they were really pissed.
When it was announced that you were buying Motorola.
This is not good. It was a very quiet way of saying we're going to kill
I can tell you that was not what happened with me when I visited them.
You were just there.
Well, I was just there a year ago, right after the acquisition, and spoke with them, and I told them the following, and I'll repeat to you. The architecture of Android requires an ecosystem of partners that invest lots of money and make lots of money on their hardware platforms. We won't do anything to screw that up by virtue of Motorola. So in particular, it's run separately. Again, maybe I didn't understand your question. It's run separately, but it doesn't get any advantage over Samsung, for example. Right? It's treated as a separate entity.
But if hardware-software integration is such a good thing, which I think you said, why would you run it separately and at arm's length and not give it why wouldn't you bring out do what Microsoft
because we benefit from having a larger pie, right? So by having all these players and treating them on pretty much an equal basis.
And you don't think, I'm moving to the next step, would it be fair to logically conclude from what you just said that it's fundamentally untenable to be in the business of licensing a software platform and selling hardware in competition with your licensees?
But Google is doing that. So of course I think it's okay. You just have to do it in the right way. So you're asking questions about Microsoft. So I don't know what their internal discussions were, obviously, but I would assume they have the same issue with Dell and HP and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they must have had a conversation analogous to the conversation that I had with our top partners, including Samsung, where I said, look, we're doing this for the right strategic reasons for our business, in the case of acquiring Motorola, but we will absolutely make sure, and we promise you that to be treated. And if I were using Samsung as an example, I would adopt an approach of, okay, I believe him until he doesn't tell the truth anymore. And so far, we've done a good job of maintaining that relationship, and I can tell you that Samsung is very, very happy with us, and the partnership's incredibly strong as of today.
One of the things that makes me think about all the different things you're doing is the vast ambition of Google in lots of areas. Sometimes I call you the Borg. I don't really apologize because I think you are. But I think about you like a Borg, like just eating everything that comes across it. What is the end game for Google in this? What is its real purpose? In the beginning, it was, and it's on the wall, it's a beautiful definition of to collect the world's information. It's a very clear definition of what you do. What is the mission of Google today?
Google can be understood as our goal is to be in the center of the information revolution.
That's everything.
Well, it's everything involving information as we can do a good job. We're limited by our ability to produce excellent products. And we've had our share of products that have not worked, and hopefully we've killed them fairly quickly. But the world doesn't need more copycat products, it needs innovative products. And we pride ourselves in what we think of as systematic innovation. We're fortunate to have the economics and the engineers to really invent completely new platforms and try new things.
And so are you different than the other 3 members of the Gang of 4 in that respect?
Again, I don't work there. Apple certainly has the cash, the people, the talent, and the scale to do exactly the kind of stuff that Google is attempting, or other things. Amazon and Facebook, I don't know as much. Facebook certainly has lots of money from the IPO, so they have lots of strategic freedom to explore this.
But
and
they
Amazon,
don't.
I would think.
But they don't do that. Google's I mean, you're making the car, you're making the glasses, you're putting them on models and making them unattractive. It's incredible. Just go look at the pictures.
Different definition of beauty.
I suppose. I guess. Walt and I call them the anti-dating glasses.
Actually, I call them the celibacy glasses.
Right. In any case, I sit and I know Google very well, but I'm like, what are they up to with the cars? And they're big ideas.
Oh, but why don't we celebrate innovation?
I would, but it frightens me a little bit. I'll be honest with you.
You don't want to have a car that drives you?
I don't know if I want a Google car that drives me. You know what I mean?
You can have one of the competitors that will emerge.
Absolutely, but it seems like it's one of the things I had an argument with one of your, might have even been Megan. They're saying we're doing good things. The same thing. I mean, you must have a chip that goes on or something like that. We're helping innovation. We're going to explore the world, but. We're trying to do these good things, and I'm like, well, who runs Google in 10 years? What if someone bad runs Google in 10 years?
I'm quite sure that the current leadership will still be there.
What is the overall ambition is still to collect the world's information and control it, collect the world's information and give it back to people? What?
Okay, you're just making stuff up
I don't know. I want to know what it is.
Let me answer the questions in order. Let's talk about cars. It's really an error that we're allowed to drive the car. It's an error that's 100 years old. The computer can clearly drive the car more accurately, precisely, and safely than we can once we get a few bugs worked out.
Yeah.
Okay? Right? Right?
How many people have ever owned a computing device from any company, not just Google, where there were 0 bugs, 0 problems?
So the serious point is there are somewhat more than 30,000 people who are killed on American highways. It's a terrible tragedy. That number is declining on a percentage basis on miles driven, but not on an absolute basis. If there's some way where we can actually make a difference there, that's pretty exciting. So we had a research project to look at it, and it works. We're pretty proud of that.
It's a big idea.
It's a big idea, and what's the likely scenario? The most likely scenario is the car companies, all of whom we're in conversations with, will use some set of our components to make their cars safer. We're very proud of this. Take a look at the Google Glasses. We don't exactly know what it's like to have a device that gives you the perspective of another human from their own eyes, but what an interesting platform to try new things on. And in fact, we announced that sometime after January, we're going to have developer kits of a slightly remodeled and presumably still unattractive.
They're looking better. The original ones, you have to go look at the original
thing that you add to your glasses that gives you the perspective that you've never been able to see before. We don't know where that perspective will take us. We don't know how we know there's plenty of applications that are information-centric, of people who have jobs and so forth and so on, where we could use this.
What else are you working on? Time machine? What else?
Time machine is very difficult. It violates the laws of physics.
What about transporters?
We've had those conversations.
They have.
We've had those conversations.
Yeah, because I don't know if you still have it, but Sergey Brin, one of the founders, once dragged me into a thing in some hallway in Google, which he called a holodeck.
Yes, we have the holodeck.
Which was really just a bunch of monitors with Google Earth on them in a continuous way. It was with a joystick. It was kind of cool, but so everything Star Trek, I assume you're trying to invent.
Yes, we have to follow the fundamental laws of physics.
So
and Gene Roddenberry didn't?
That's the difference between science fiction and us.
Before we get to the questions from the audience, which we've got here in cards, and please write some more, let's talk about just the innovation and what you're doing. What is Eric Schmidt's life like right now? You're the intergalactic chairman of Google, clearly.
Well, I spend a lot of time on airplanes. I've become very interested in the impacts of the digital technology that we're talking about on society. So my colleague Jared Cohen and I are publishing a book early next year. We're almost done. That talks about what happens to society when everybody's interconnected. And I think most of us, and certainly our view, is that this is overwhelmingly positive, but there are things to look for. You know, what happens when autocrats decide to really be even more autocratic using these tools and those sorts of things. So I've become quite interested in that. I'm spending a lot of time on innovation. The simple summary of a much longer conversation is, as a country, we're actually doing pretty well. But if you look at the studies of morale among the citizens of America, it's among the lowest it's been in many, many decades, especially in the last few years. If you analyze it analytically, you say there are sort of three problems. There's a demographic problem, there's a globalization problem, and there's an automation problem. The demographic problem is we have a percentage of older rather than younger people. Younger people need to be more productive. The globalization problem is real simple. It means you can't raise prices. And the automation problem means that people will implement a machine quicker than they'll hire a person. So that is at the underpinning of all of the sort of political debates and fights and so forth that we all listen to all day in our sort of global discussion. We need some solutions to that. The only solutions that I've been able to come up with involve education and innovation. Education is how you get a more advanced workforce for the coming challenges, and we can talk about that. And innovation is where jobs get created. And if you look at how jobs are created, the big companies have not created net new jobs in America, but small, innovative companies are typically generating all of them. So I would hope that the platforms that we've discussed, which includes ours as well as our competitors, will in fact be the engines of that innovation, because that's how America will
Even though almost all these devices are made in China or somewhere.
The economics of these devices is extraordinarily US, because the software industry, the profits, the advertising and so forth is just money spread all over the United States. They're very, very profitable for the US as a country.
So what are your top worries in reaching that? Is the lack of education, a lack of science, STEM?
You know, I've come to a conclusion which generations of people before us have all come to, which is that you need to educate your citizens. And I would argue with you that almost every problem that you read about in the newspaper and so forth would ultimately be solved by education, tolerance, learning more things. I would argue furthermore that the gap between the elites who are very highly educated and able to use these tools and everybody else is getting much greater. Partly that's because the technology is moving so quickly. In the next 5 or 10 years, we'll all have sort of universal broadband much, much faster than we have today. Google's involved with this Kansas City project, which is phenomenal. And we'll have a whole bunch of new devices that will make our lives much, much easier. You know, automatic gesture recognizing robots and things like this, which are in the lab today. The gap between the leading countries and the leaders in those countries and everybody else is getting larger. We need to make that gap shorter with a lot of aggressive technology.
We were talking a little bit in the reception about this. Are you a proponent of using technology tools to do more online or asynchronous education where you're not necessarily on a campus, even at an elite level like Columbia?
Well, each of the universities is going to make a decision between Udacity, Coursera, and then a set of initiatives that are within universities. For those of you that are not following it, this was kicked off by a couple people at Google who were AI professors, and they did a class that was online. They had 150,000 people teaching computer science AI. And the model is not the same as the traditional standing on the whiteboard and teaching like we're all used to. It's a model, they're called MOOCs. It's a massive online course model, where there are on the order of 5 or 10 minute segments, and then there's sort of group exercises, and then another set of 5 or 10 minute segments. And I would describe this whole area as version 1. So go back and think about version 1 of the iPhone or the Android phone or Google or what have you. It's hard to remember the difference and how much they have changed. So what we're seeing now are the just glimmers of what will be possible in this new educational model. I personally believe that every university will try this, and they'll try it a different way. And I think it's one of the things about education, especially at the K through 12 level, is there's very little innovation and very little real competition. And my view is that these online technologies are going to unleash massive competition among educators at every level, and that competition ultimately will serve the students, which is what we should be doing.
I think maybe we should go to the questions
Absolutely.
which are written on these cards, and I'll just read one, and Kara can read one, and we'll go back and forth. HP has a legendary reputation in Silicon Valley. Could you comment on HP's current struggles and future prospects?
Meg is a very, very strong and capable CEO.
Meg Whitman.
Meg Whitman, and she's identified it's a multi-year, I don't know if she's used the word turnaround, but it's a multi-year set of changes that she has to do. And the issues that she's facing have to do with these massive shifts from the PC to the tablet and things like that. It's hard for me to opine on it. It's very easy to criticize a company that you're not in. I think it's probably best to sort of wait and see how they react to the global changes. What I will say is that when I was in those kinds of businesses in my earlier jobs, 10 years ago, we had a lot of time. We had long product cycles.
Those are you mean
enterprise businesses and the product cycles I was at a company called Sun, which is now part of Oracle, and we had lots of time. The industry is now so competitive that there's no time. You're on a chain gang, right? This product cycle, this CPU chip, so forth. And if you're off by a week, you miss millions of dollars, right? And the whole supply chain is different. The design cycles are different. And ultimately, this is how you'll judge. The ultimate judge is the consumer, and the competition is producing extraordinarily valued consumers, but it's very hard for people to stay on the current edge, and it would be very hard, I think, for anybody.
This is sort of in that vein. If you had to be the CEO, if you decided you want to be a CEO again, we were a CEO for 10 years.
I think 10 years is enough.
10 years is enough. But if you had to be a CEO of Apple, Facebook, or Amazon, which would you choose and why? Fantastic question.
Great question.
Well, I was on the board of Apple, and so I always had a special spot for Apple. And plus they have more cash. But I think if you look at, I think that's another way of asking the question, what is the state of those companies? Each of them has a different set of challenges. I was very, very good friends and close to Steve Jobs, and we miss him dearly. One of the great things about Steve is that he imbued a culture in Apple that is strong and will continue to propel them, I think, very well. Jeff Bezos at Amazon, of course, is the founder, and has made remarkable moves. If you look at the way he's been able to integrate his supply chain, so for example, they recently bought a factory automation company that was particularly clever to make their factories their warehouses even more efficient. And in Facebook, as I said, if you have 1 billion users growing at that rate, you can make money.
So,
which one?
Which would you run?
Which has the most cash?
Apple. Okay. Here's a question I think we already asked, but I guess since the audience asked it, I'll ask it again. Can you dance Gangnam style?
I would prefer not to.
You prefer not to.
You want to ask a real one?
Yeah, I'll ask a real one. When will we actually have mainstream self-driven cars?
And do you have one?
I have been driven by the car, and it is a life-changing experience. What we do is we put you in the seat and we let you drive it, and then we have it drive. It drives a race course, and you drive around the race course, and then we have the race button, and we let it drive you in the race course. And
you're sitting in the driver's seat.
Yeah, you're sitting in the driver's seat, and you're just white when you get out from loss of blood flow. So these things can drive.
So when will it be mainstream?
I think there's a couple of things. The most important thing to say is, although we call it driverless car, it's better to think of this as a car autopilot. And I can tell you that in the car there's a very large red button, which is the disconnect, roughly like an autopilot disconnect.
Like an exercise machine.
Like an exercise machine, this one, and I think that'll always be the case. So this technology will ultimately be expressed as cars which have much more sophisticated ways of getting you from point A to point B. But you're going to be sitting behind the wheel. You're going to be watching it. You'll watch it turn, right, et cetera.
No, you'll probably be texting then.
That would. My guess is that law will never change.
Yeah. Apple gets huge margins selling phones. What reduces those, if anything?
Competition. it's really easy to understand why prices fall in our industry. It's competition.
This is a little, I have to confess, and if you wrote this, maybe you can help me. The question says, expansion in Asia, how will you differentiate against, and then I'm having trouble with the handwriting. Can you just yell it out? Neighbor, etc. Locally.
There are a number of countries where we appear to not be the #1 search engine. Naver is an example. It's the search engine in Korea. And we've done well in Korea. Historically, American companies have not done well in Korea because they've had their own technologies and services. As Korea's gotten much more mainstream because of all the great successes of Korean companies, we've got significantly increasing market share in Korea. But our strategy is we want to continue to serve customers everywhere. And so we'll continue to invest. The Korean language is different from other languages, and so it affects search and so forth. We have a whole team in Korea doing that. There are 4 or 5 countries where we do not appear to be #1 in search, and we're putting significant efforts to make sure it's competitive. We want to get there.
What about China? The relationship is much more fraught than I think even has been reported. What is the relation between you and the government of China?
Well, there isn't.
Not you particularly.
Yeah, the story, I think, as people here know, is that 5-ish years ago, we entered China, and they have this hellacious law that requires you to do dynamic censorship of things. And the way the law is written, you can't admit it, and you can't describe it, and you can't publish the details. So it's true hardcore censorship. It's implemented by phone calls. So you'll get a phone call to a particular group which says that the such and such embarrassing thing occurred, you must delete it now. When we entered China, we agreed that we would do this, and through a process of negotiation, we're allowed to actually publish the fact that information was omitted, right? So if there was some scandal involving some leader, you tried to type that name in, what would happen is it would say that. The architecture of the internet in China is that there's something called the Great Firewall between America and the mainland. And this is a series, they're technically known as proxy caches. And these proxy caches are firewalls that can block content. And so what would happen is the Chinese government would get mad and they would just cut off the connection. So for example, in the last year, there have been a number of instances where they got mad at our Gmail strategy. We got mad at them because they were busy. It looked to us that they were following up and trying to snoop on Gmail for human rights activists, which we think is a foul on their part. So they would shut down Gmail access for a while and then turn it back on. And I think that's roughly where we are. We have a pretty successful business inside of China, which is export ads, and we also have significant global engineering inside of Beijing and Shanghai. But I don't have any short-term expectation that the Chinese government is going to call up and say, first they have to have their leadership transition, so nothing's going to happen until they have their new leaders. I can't imagine the new leaders calling me up and saying, "Oh, Eric, we apologize." This is just not going to happen, as optimistic as I'd like that to be. So I think realistically that means that Baidu will continue to be the #1 player in China for a long time. And China has in its power to arbitrarily restrict our access to Chinese citizens to keep us at whatever percentage market share they wish.
So this question, you can actually probably read it from your seat. It says, future products or services, and has 3 question marks.
We don't talk about future products and services. We have a lot
But there is
coming.
the time machine, right?
We have a lot of stuff coming.
Okay.
Well, let me, if I can transform it a little bit, without specific reference to Google. We all know sort of what's out there now. I don't think people expected, I mean, there was a thing called a smartphone before the iPhone, but the iPhone was still a huge game changer because it was truly a smartphone. We have, as you pointed out, an even larger number of Android devices. There were attempts to do tablets, all of which failed or were merely vertical things that people used in specific work situations. And then iPad, and now we have Android tablets, and we will soon have Windows 8 tablets. So without specific reference to Google, what's the next big thing?
Well, the next big thing for the next few years is more mobility. I call this mobile first. And the next generation of startups and engineers and so forth build a mobile application first, and they build a web application second. Technically, these are essentially customized Android, which is Java-based, or iOS, which is Objective-C-based applications ahead of, for example, the HTML5 web app. And I think that's going to be the story.
Everybody get all that jargon?
Yeah.
So,
Got it.
that's the technical distinction.
You're basically saying that they will build in the native
mode
language for Android and iPhones
for the next little
and
while.
iPads.
The level of innovation that's possible on these platforms is extraordinary. They have a compass, they have an accelerometer, they know where they are, they have a GPS, and they have a supercomputer behind them and a fast interconnection now with LTE. And LTE is generally known as 4G, and it even works here in New York. So there's just acres and acres and acres of startups building very powerful, very sophisticated human interaction services of one kind or another using these personal devices. So I think that's the narrative that most people will see. The underlying computer science narrative is known as big data or essentially analytics. And what happens is that you get all this data connected and you put it in these servers, and all of a sudden you can do very interesting questions. You can answer questions you couldn't before. You see this when you see Amazon give you a recommendation. And again, all of that gets much, much better. What happens after that is much more of, think of it as sort of true AI. Here's an example. 5 years or 10 years from now, you'll wake up in your apartment. The bed will determine when to wake you up based on your REM sleep cycle. That technology is available today. And you'll have holographic or flat screens around you that will, because you've asked them, they'll personalize to the world around you, and they'll tell you whether you need to really wake up or not. Hopefully you'll get into your driver-assisted or driverless car, and you go to the office, and all of those tasks, like where am I, what am I supposed to be doing, all of that will be taken care of for you in these AI systems. The power that we can come up with that will help you get through the day, making suggestions, doing analytics, telling you, did you know, is going to be extraordinary. And you can see that when you look at young people today who largely live on the web, right? They follow Twitter, they use all that information. As our systems get better, we'll be able to do the same kind of analysis that a 22-year-old does with their Twitter screen and with all the web services, but do it automatically for everybody.
And how long will that be in beta? Will it be in beta as long as Gmail was? Or?
Probably, because it's hard to get to the reason we can't do all of this today is that we can do it for 80% but not 99% of the data, right? The AI problem goes something like this. You can build a set of solutions which will largely discover everything humans know with an 80% accuracy. The problem is that the 20% is the 20% that matters, and that we've been stuck at this for quite some time. And that's a real threshold that computation will allow us to overcome over the next 5 or 10 years.
I don't mean to, again, I seem like a crazy paranoid person, but it sounds like the plot of the Terminator.
But I want to be clear here, because I always get in trouble with this. Everything I've just said is your choice. And if you want to continue to use Google the old way, not be logged in, and continue to sort of ignore everything I just said, we're going to encourage you to do so, because that's going to be a great use
So no
too.
chips in people's heads?
No,
Okay, good.
certainly not from Google.
Not from Google, okay.
By the way, I should mention that there is just so we're clear about chips, there's a revolution in biomedicine that you might choose to have a chip, and it goes like this. There's a new set of pills that you can take, which you ingest, which Wi-Fi out all your vital signs. And what happens, and you all laugh, but wouldn't you rather have the computer give an accurate diagnosis of your medical condition, like right now, and then your phone calls the doctor, right? And the doctor then calls you back and said, you're about to die, come to the hospital, right? So we're on the...
car picks you up.
Absolutely.
And
We're on the... The revolution in medicine you're going to want these kinds of things if it
How
saves your
often
life.
do you take these Wi-Fi pills? Like, you're feeling fine, but you just decide, maybe I'm going to die.
I will let the startups and the designers who are inventing these new technologies
Speaking of,
figure
someone
that out.
asked a question about Twitter. How do you look at Twitter, and is Google interested in buying, would Google be interested in buying companies like that?
Can't answer questions about M&A like that. We had a partnership where we put the Twitter feed inside of search, and ultimately that deal fell apart, but I would certainly like to see some form of that. I've always felt that Twitter had done a very good job. And if you look today, Twitter is a place where news breaks very fast, and they've done an excellent job of celebrity and other sort of branding. We now have a competitor in the form of Google+, where we're beginning to see similar dynamics. And so again, that may ultimately become a significant competitor to Twitter.
You have one more? I have one more question
I do have one
here.
more, but...
We just a few more minutes. What is Google doing to ameliorate the environmental costs associated with the cloud's giant server farms? The cloud. costs recently reported on by the New York Times.
The general accepted number for the electricity use and environmental impact of this sort of cloud world that I'm describing is between 1% to 2% of global power use, which is a big number. It's not a small number. Google has for a long time had the largest and most powerful data centers. You've not seen them because you just see the benefit of it when you see a fast search. But I can describe them to you as racks and racks of very specialized hardware that hum. It feels like when you're in them, it feels like you're in a submarine. You have this sort of, this constant whirring sound of all the disks and all the activity that's going on. We have done many, many things to make the environmental impact of these servers less. And we've said publicly that we think ours are roughly half the load in terms of environmental impact of the other choices. And the ways we've done this are largely considered proprietary, but you can imagine, because we make so many of such things, we can make specialized chips, specialized hardware, specialized fans, specialized power loads, specialized air conditioning to minimize the load. Overall, I'd say that this is making human decisions more efficient. We probably will ultimately get better savings environmentally because the information platform will be able to make a better use of how you spend your time, where you go, where you travel to. So hopefully, eventually, we'll be net positive.
So let me just close, because this is a part of a commemoration of the centenary of the journalism school, by asking a question about journalism and the news. There's been, over the last 4 or 5 years, some friction between traditional news outlets and Google over Google News and a bunch of other things. Steve Jobs, when he came to D the last time, actually gave a little speech about how concerned he was that quality journalism might be fading, and that he felt that some things like tablets and other things might help in that respect. Are you worried about the future of quality journalism, and what would you do about it?
I have been for a long time, and if we go back to 5 or 10 years ago, you guys have lived this, you know it very well. The economic model of newspapers was a combination of classifieds, subscriptions, and in-print ads. The in-print ads are largely online, the classifieds are largely online, and the newspaper print went up. So the publishers tried valiantly to swim against headwinds, whatever metaphor you want, against all three of their core revenue streams, which is very, very difficult to deal with. There are a couple of success models, and they all use new models for monetization. The two that are most obvious would be Politico and Huffington Post. They do it differently for each of them, but both born out of startup innovation of new approaches. So it's fair to say that the incumbents, who, and I say this with great honor and respect for their role, are likely to move to various forms of subscription models, because that's something they understand they can subscribe. Instead of physically, they subscribe online. And the newspaper of the future for that will be a very deeply powerful newspaper online. You'll get it on a tablet. It will be much richer than the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times that you read today. You'll be able to dive deeply in the story, and it's pretty obvious what that product looks like. So what does this mean for the art of journalism? I think two things. The first is that the sort of extra money that was generated by the unholy alliance, if you will, between print and the classifieds and so forth, which has largely sort of gotten itself out of whack today, produced extra money that these people devoted to deep research and investigative journalism. And there's no question that that's at risk, and it's been at risk for a while. And that's a real loss. It's a loss at the city level. It's a loss at the mayor level. It's a loss at the sort of the scandal of the medical provider. You know, there's example after example. And these are not stories that can be reported in a day. Right? You all are professional reporters. Yeah. And again, the Columbia Journalism School produces such people, much harder for them to have jobs. The other thing that happens, which I don't think we've quite figured out, is what happens to the brand. Right? So what's happened now, of course, is that the top brands, and this is true in any network effect business, the top brands have remained quite strong. Again, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, et cetera. But many of the mid-tier regional brands have largely become not as relevant for whatever set of reasons. So one idea is that the new brands will be much more celebrity-driven. and that people will ultimately be drawn to, this famous celebrity who has this set of news and entertainment activity. So in the online world, celebrities drive a lot of behavior. So it may very well be that the ultimate structure is a set of the traditional brands that are left, which I think will continue and will do well in these other monetizations, and then these celebrity-driven brands. And I have no idea what they'll look like. I don't know how they'll monetize themselves, but people will follow them.
You mean like the Ashton Kutcher Daily?
You could imagine that, or think of the Jay-Z post.
The Jay-Z post.
Right, that people are, in this new world, people are really driven by what celebrities think and what they care about. And they follow them with great interest and so forth. And you could have some public-spirited celebrities who would actually want to make a real positive impact. And my guess is that will be a new player, or at least some people will try that in the next few years.
And what about the Googles of the world buying? At one point you did consider, you looked at some.
As I said, we decided fairly clearly and fairly early that there was a line that we didn't want to cross.
But looked at it, correct?
Sure, but we look at everything. One day I was in Larry Zerka's office, and we had they started talking to me about getting into the refrigerator business, and they discussed at great length why having a computer-powered refrigerator would work and how you could automate it and so forth, and they announced that they were going to buy a company to do this. And then I realized that they were joking. So I've never forgotten that I could never quite tell whether we're serious or not, but we certainly thought about it, at least for those 10 minutes.
Well, great.
And we're not buying a refrigerator business, to my knowledge.
Well,
that's right.
Eric,
with that,
and thank you, by the way, you're rocking that pumpkin sweater, I got to tell you.
Thank you
thank
very
you
much.
so much.
Choice.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.